Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Untangle Tech Talk series. Today, we'll be showcasing one of the NG Firewall applications, our bandwidth control. My name is Shannon Bonfiglio. I'm part of the marketing team here at Untangle, and I'll be your host today. I have with us Chad McNaughton, who's one of our sales engineers, and he will be taking us through the presentation and a detailed demo. Just a few housekeeping rules before I pass it over to Chad. Please be sure you're selecting the correct audio preference. On the right-hand side, you'll see the option to use your phone. If you do select this option, you will need to use the access code that is provided. You can also use your computer speakers. As always, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch or revisit areas that you want to follow up on. All of our webinars are posted on the Untangle YouTube channel, and everyone who is registered will receive a link to that recording. We do answer questions throughout the webinar, so please submit your questions in the questions box on the right-hand side. We have a few staff members on hand that'll help answer those questions. If you have a very specific support question, please email us at support@untangle.com or hit us up on the forums. And if we do not get to your question, I do apologize for that, but please send those to sales@untangle.com. Now, before I pass it over to Chad, just want to reiterate, this is a highly technical webinar. So if you're unfamiliar with Untangle or any networking concepts, then this may not be the best webinar for you. We do have a higher level webinar series called our 101 webinars. Those kind of cover more high-level topics for those who are not so into networking concepts. So you'll find a list of all of those webinars on our website. And I think that's it, so I'll pass it over to Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. And thanks everyone for joining us this morning. As Shannon said, I just want to reiterate, this is a Tech Talks webinar. This is not Untangle 101. We do have two different series. So this is going to be a fairly deep dive into bandwidth control and things like quality of service and web filter, other apps that it leverages. So what we'll do real quick is just kind of give you a brief overview of bandwidth control, and then we'll jump into the slide deck, and then like Shannon said, we'll do a brief demonstration on one of my live servers. So, what is bandwidth control? Well, this is layer 7 traffic shaping. So for devices that you're filtering, not devices you're bypassing, we use bandwidth control to shape their traffic. This is where we can set quotas, tag devices, users. We can also throttle or prioritize traffic. So you're going to have the power to control and monitor bandwidth usage on the network. And then, like I said, throttle or prioritize based on a whole lot of different criteria. So whether it's an IP address, a username, a MAC address, a certain site, a certain mobile app, I'll show you when we get to the server. There's a ton of conditions because this thing sits at layer 7, so it sees all of those. So some of the setup and configuration, I'll walk through this a little bit, but basically what we're doing is we're using this to ensure that the network continues to run smoothly and that bandwidth is shared optimally based on everyone. One of the really cool things about bandwidth control is you can actually install it into Untangle without activating it, and you'll start to get reports on bandwidth usage. And then you can activate it, run through the setup wizard, and create some rules. A lot of organizations struggle with bandwidth problems, especially in different parts of the world where bandwidth is really expensive and infrastructure is weak. In the Caribbean, places like South Africa, it's really expensive there. So something like bandwidth control can help you find out that students are watching online videos or that there's someone using BitTorrent on a tablet or their laptop. People who are doing normal work are struggling for bandwidth, and these other services are basically stealing it away from them. So with bandwidth control, you'll run through a little wizard-based setup with some pre-configured rule sets that I'll show you here on my server. And this is going to leverage quality of service settings, like I said. So we set up quality of service first. We tell Untangle your download, upload speeds, and then those priorities get used throughout the system here in bandwidth control. And bandwidth control does work really well with multiple apps in the Untangle NGFW complete package. I mentioned it can leverage URLs from web filter, mobile applications from application control. It sees usernames and groups from directory connector. If you have an active directory group that needs to be throttled, we can do that by group. A quick tip here, actually, if you're looking to throttle a mobile app, some of us would immediately go to application control, but you don't do that there. All that is blocking or passing traffic. So you would come into bandwidth control and you would go down and say application control, application is, Facebook, throttle. So I mentioned quality of service a lot. So basically bandwidth control when compared to QoS is similar and different, obviously. So anytime we bypass a device with Untangle's bypass rules, that's when you go to config network bypass rules. Those rules technically isolate those devices' traffic to layer 3. This is a very different animal than letting something process all the way up to layer 7. So because they're stuck at layer 3, we use quality of service to ensure their performance. So this is for things like VoIP. If you're bypassing printers, things like that, we can still control and shape their traffic even when they're bypassed. So like I said, this is leveraged to create those layer 7 rules in bandwidth control. And if we're filtering traffic, it is handled differently. It's going to go through the entire Untangled network stack rather than just the Linux packet flow where we stop at layer 3 here. So just keep that in mind. When you bypass devices to take them off your licensing, we can still shape their traffic and prioritize or deprioritize them. We just do it here through quality of service. So that's under config network advanced QoS. Bandwidth control offers quotas as well. I'll show you how this looks when we set it up in my server. But quotas are really handy. They're just set amounts of data that can be used over a certain amount of time, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly. You can see in my example there, we're saying you get a gigabyte of data every day. And if you exceed that, then we throttle you. You're limited more. So this is really useful for clients that need to punish excessive bandwidth consumption. So if you have someone who's constantly using a gig, 2 gigs of your data a day, we can come in here and say, well, no, you only get 300 megabytes of that. So it's a really handy system. And this is all set up through the actual wizard that I'll show you. So they can be assigned to users or hosts. So we can put a quota on a username or an IP. Then we can just click through the users or hosts menus in our dashboard and just take a quick peek. Is quota yes? All sessions data passing through Untangle gets counted against that corresponding host or user. So every single packet that comes across counts against their quota. So by using the quotas and the rules, bandwidth abusers are kind of handled automatically and you don't have to intervene. So that's a big undertaking if you're a network admin, especially with Untangle. We work with so many small businesses and little nonprofits and schools and churches. You may not even be the full-time IT person there. You might be someone who's a hobbyist who has a kid at the school, or you're a member of the church. We have a lot of customers like that. So something like bandwidth control can just take that manual aspect out of monitoring consumption rates. So we can set up all kinds of different rules. If something comes through meeting a specific condition, bandwidth control will just automatically take these steps for you, and you don't really have to do anything. You'll see what's happening in the reporting, and if there is something that needs to change, obviously you can go change that. But for the most part, we can just kind of set it and forget it based on what you guys need to do to control or shape that traffic. Quick tip on this one is that the quotas are actually applied via rules. So if you create a quota, you have to make sure that that rule is formatted to check for an existing quota and that it's up at the top of the rule set. And I'll show you guys how to do that when we get to my server. Basically, we just need it dragged above any other conflicting rules. Speaking of rules, here's a quick peek at a basic config on Untangle. This is run through, I believe, like a school configuration. It's set up about 23 rules for them. So this is where we create those rules to change priorities or to tag someone or to give them a quota. So any traffic passing through bandwidth control that you're filtering, we'll be able to see it, report on it, institute a whole lot of rules based on a lot of conditions. I've mentioned it kind of working well with other Untangle apps. So officially the list is obviously it leverages quality of service. We can see web filter URLs and categories. So we could say category is streaming and downloadable video, throttle to death. You don't necessarily have to block content to prevent people from using it. So if your organization doesn't want to be very heavy-handed, if you like to give your users some freedom on the internet, your employees, you can still do that without blocking content, but we can come over here and maybe throttle the site or just deprioritize the entire category. It's an interesting aspect that you can dissuade this kind of behavior without really blocking content. You can just make these things no fun for people to use. It also hits application control. So these are mobile application signatures that needs to be installed, obviously, in the policy. It's part of our complete package. But then we can leverage those signatures. We can say mobile application is YouTube, throttle it, et cetera, et cetera. We also leverage directory connector. I mentioned it can see groups and domains from things like Active Directory if we're leveraging something like that. Bandwidth control, I think, offers some of the most useful reporting out of the box that Untangle offers. Like I said, you can install the app without really setting up any rules or running through the setup wizard, and it'll start reporting on consumption for you. So you can see this little report that we're looking at right here on my screen is top applications usage. So these are the mobile apps that are using up my bandwidth. And you can see the winner there in green in the middle is Reddit. So to me as an admin, that's an issue. I would immediately go to application control and either block Reddit if that's something I can do, or I would come out here to bandwidth control and just throttle it. So you can see some of those things are pretty unavoidable, HTTP, SSL, things like that. But I also see GiphyCat and Wikipedia and the Google Play Store. So things like that, we can come in and say, oh, well, people are just downloading this. They're just using this mobile app all the time. And then we can take the steps we need to kind of deprioritize stuff. This is just going to let you quickly and easily identify the big bandwidth consumers. And you can see in the top left there of that window, we actually have a little conditions button now. If I wanted to narrow that down for a specific user, for a specific client IP, I could say username is, client is, and that would change my entire reporting module right there to list all the reports that feature that condition. So if you have usernames, you can say username is, and that's the top applications being used by that user on a mobile device. So bandwidth control has about 25 reports by default. Every one of them can be customized and saved as a new report. You can always create new blank reports from scratch as well. And then you see the little support tip here. I kind of jumped the gun on. Obviously, you can install bandwidth control and leave it turned off, and that'll actually give you the reporting data, which is really handy. Sometimes you don't want to turn it on and start impacting traffic immediately. So just install it and give us a few days of reporting, and then you can see what the actual problem areas are, if there are any. Like this report right here would be pretty drastic to me as an admin. I would immediately go throttle or block Reddit based on that. Just kind of another peek at reports here. This is basically a very similar report, application control, applications by megabytes. So you can see there Reddit pops up as over 53%, wow, almost 54% of application usage consuming my bandwidth. So that's a huge, huge red flag to me as an admin. So I would go out and I would block that. And you can see on the right there, I'm just looking at a session viewer. So you're seeing country codes, you're seeing the pipeline they're coming through, all my apps, things like that. So we'll see sessions on mobile apps, we'll see bandwidth consuming websites, any services they're doing. If we jump into bandwidth controls reports, you get all that visibility right there. So let's hop over to my server here real quick, and I'm going to run through some QoS and some bandwidth control for you. So this is a live machine I have. You guys can always jump on demo.untangle.com and play around anytime you want. This one here will let me run through the complete config. So what I want to show you first is quality of service. So that would be under config network advanced. And you'll see here, if I come over one tab to quality of service, I have this enabled. It's not always enabled by default. So just if you run through the bandwidth control setup wizard, it's going to force you here first, because bandwidth control needs your download and upload speeds to know what it's working with. So this is in kilobits per second. You can see I have two WANs on this one. I've got 150 down and 100 down respectively, so times 1,000. And then my upload speeds similarly. So as long as we have your kind of maximum speed here, we always know what we're working with. Bandwidth control can leverage all of those priorities, etc. I mentioned earlier, this is only going to apply to bypass devices, and that's what these rules are for. So I bypass VoIP traffic based on those 3 ports, but I also give them a very high priority from QoS. So you can see we automatically give pings and DNS very high, SSH is defaulted, OpenVPN is defaulted. So these are important. When you're bypassing devices, you don't want to just bypass them and maybe leave them be without a rule. We might still need to come and prioritize or deprioritize that traffic. So we can do that here with these rules. This is going to be layer 3 conditions. So we would say source address is, tag is, port is, etc. And this is where that comes into play. The actual percentages of those priorities live right here as well. So what we're seeing, reservation, upload, download reservation. Reservation is minimum. So if I'm throttling someone as much as possible, they'll get a minimum 2%. They'll get a maximum 10% of my bandwidth. If that's too much, just change it. You can come in here and say, well, I want maximum to be 4%. So this is where that all comes from. So it depends on what your organization needs to do. You can see mine is defaulted to the top 4 priorities, all being able to get 100% of my available bandwidth. But that's assuming no one listed above them is online. So if no one up here is basically using any of this traffic, I'm going to be able to give 100% of my download bandwidth to anyone in a low priority. So this is where they live. This is where you can customize them. We start pretty minimal. The defaults for throttled severely, limited severely are 2% and 10%. I like to change the 10% to be a little lower. That's just me. But this is always up to you. It's kind of a personal flavor. See what works best for you. And then on the statistics page here, we just get good stats about traffic coming through. Anything on my actual interfaces, you'll see the amount of data coming through on those and their priorities. So that's QoS. It's pretty simple. Obviously, it's layer 3 conditions. It's I guess kind of minimized traffic shaping because it's only going to see those bypass devices. But it's crucial that you set all that stuff up so we can then come in and do all this fun stuff. So you can see I've already run my bandwidth control wizard. It's enabled, it's scanning sessions, but I'm going to go ahead and run through the wizard again real quick for you guys. So when you jump into bandwidth control, you get all these good metrics. If it's prioritizing sessions, if it's doing anything fun right here, you'll see all the sessions it's scanning. You'll also get quick peeks at reports. So if you want to just take a quick peek at a report, top host names, top usernames, depends. You could just click right there. You can get to untangle reports from a lot of different ways. If I just want to see the IPs, these are the ones we were looking at earlier. So there's a lot of ways to get to the reporting. Within the actual settings menu there, I'm going to click on the setup wizard. So you can read through this wizard. If the warning is, completing the wizard overrides the previous settings, of course it does. But then again, there's those 4 apps that we connect to so easily and leverage. So these are really crucial because we want to be able to see into those signatures and the URLs and usernames and things like that. So on my WAN configuration, you'll see those are pulling the QoS values that we just showed. The note up there is basically saying when enabling QoS, limits must be set. So if you're not running QoS, this is where bandwidth control is going to force you. So it will make you go back to QoS and set that stuff up first. So mine's all set. If I wanted to tweak these, I could. I always like to put the very maximum number here that my WANs see, even if you're Comcast or Time Warner or someone gives you a 30 meg burst on some days and you see 180 here instead of 150. I like to throw 180 in there just so we know what we're working with in case it hits. So next I'm going to go to configuration, and this is where we can actually choose some templates. So if you scroll through these, you'll see that they will give you a little bit of different information, show you what they're going to do. If you're a business, we're going to optimize, web apps, things like that, prioritize interactive traffic, email, IMAP, all that stuff, deprioritizing Microsoft updates, peer-to-peer, anything that violates policy. A school is a little more strict, download sites are deprioritized, any peer-to-peer violation of policy. A college is similar, but also heavily limits BitTorrent. That can be a huge thing on a network. So whichever one of these applies the best, it's it's not like we're gonna call you and say, hey, you're not a nonprofit, you can't use that. Just whichever one works best as a baseline, go with that. I'm gonna come choose, let's see, I'm gonna choose government. So it's pretty similar. It's going to probably probably limit BitTorrent usage more, and it's gonna optimize interactive sites, web apps, things like that, and deprioritize peer-to-peer and violations. So I'm going to say yes, and we're going to go to quotas. I tend to always enable quotas when I set up an Untangle. I just like the option. So I always do IP addresses and usernames, so we can do hosts through users. If you don't have usernames leveraged, you obviously don't need that. this is an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly quota. So depending, we do have a lot of different ways to do this. For the most part, I'm just going to say end of day, you get, I'm going to say you get 400 megabytes. And if you go over that, you're going to get throttled. So that's where I changed it to 2% and 4%. So if you go over your allowance of data, well, it's the rest of the day is not going to be very fun for you on the internet. It's going to be really, really slow. So things like this, to me, come down a lot of the times to things like your organization's IT acceptable usage policy. If you don't have one in place, you're lacking recourse in some of these things. So if they know that you have a quota for data, you can't go over it. Otherwise, if you do, it sets off an alert. We know about it, et cetera. Things like that can dissuade bad behavior, is all I'm saying. So again, there's a lot of methods to change people's bandwidth consumption behaviors, and some of them are just letting them know that you're watching finally. So in organizations, especially small businesses that don't have anything like Untangle on the network yet, that can be a big deal. So with that config I chose, it gave me 22 rules built in. This is a top-down order for any packet coming through Untangle. So this is bandwidth control, and we're talking, web filter, application control, all these things as well. So something that really enables this is SSL inspector when we decrypt HTTPS. Obviously, bandwidth control and web filter and all these apps can only see HTTP traffic. So if we do go through and decrypt that stuff, we have a lot more options, obviously. The first thing that Untangle is going to check for when a packet comes through is, do they have a quota? If they don't, this gives them a quota. If they're over the quota, they go to the penalty box where they feel shame. If they don't have a quota, there's that. And then hosts also over quota. So I did that on each because I wanted those 4 rules. So they're the same rule, just username or IP. Then you can see down here, the first real shaping rule we've got is prioritizing DNS and SSH. So, things like RDP, POP3, IMAP, email, all that stuff. We're prioritizing all those things first before we start throttling anything. But rule 11 starts throttling unproductive mobile applications. This is an interesting rule, and I love this one. If you're curious, you can come over here to application control. Application control has about 1,900 mobile application signatures now. So you can come over here and say, I want to rate these by productivity level. So something like this, Active Directory, is a pretty productive app. Something like pick one, anything. We can do pornographic apps. We can do social networking here. So anything that's really useful for actual work will come up with a higher productivity level. We also have risk levels here. So you could say if a risk level is greater than 2, greater than 4, we want to actually throttle that. So we can block that as well with our application control rules. So we could come in here and just say, I want to block all those. But bandwidth control lets us see those signatures. So a kind of pro tip when I need to do something for a mobile app, if I was going to throttle Skype right here, I actually tend to copy those from application control just because some of them have really strange syntax and they're spelled incorrectly. A good example of that is, I believe the Instagram mobile app is actually missing some vowels. I think it's Instagram. So just something to be aware of. If you're using these mobile app signatures, I tend to come over here and just grab them because it's a little bit easier than, Instagram. That just complicates things. So if I wanted to, I could copy that. I could come back out to bandwidth control and I can make a rule to throttle the Instagram mobile app, and I could do it this easily. If I can type it, geez. So these are the conditions available in our layer 7 traffic shaping. So a lot of folks will stick to things like IPs, usernames, etc. We can also do something like Mac vendors. Maybe you need all the Apple devices on your network throttled. That's something we can do. For this particular one, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to say application control application is. And that's when I just paste in Instagram. And if I wanted to, I could add multiple apps there. I could just say maybe this is a social networking rule, right? I could say Facebook, I could say Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So all we do there is choose our action. Do we want to tag these people? Do we want a quota? I want to set a priority, so I'm going to throttle that, limited severely. I could, though, maybe tag them. So I can say tag is social networking. And the time of the tag's life can be short. I could do like 300 seconds. So if I wanted to just say tag it, then I can come say anytime this mobile application is presented, I'm going to tag that as social networking, Instagram user, whatever you want to type in the tag. Untangle can then leverage that tag for policy management. So maybe you have a social networking policy where these abusers get sent based on a tag, and there's less bandwidth, and they're kind of punished. So there's a few different actions here. It's basically just quotas, tagging, and throttling or prioritizing. I tend to use prioritize and tag the most because they do the most fun stuff. Tagging in Untangle is really interesting. That 300-second lifetime doesn't seem long, but that's long enough for Untangle to see it and say, oh, you're doing this that meets this condition. Now you come over to this policy for people who do those bad things. So when we're looking through the conditions, as I said, there's a lot of different ways to do this. You could, for example, just do it at the URL level. We could just say we want to throttle Netflix. So I'll delete my mobile app and I would just wildcard this like Netflix, something like that. From there, I would just say set priority, whatever it is. So even if it's your company's website, maybe an interactive web app that your employees use, something that students need to get to for e-learning, things like that, we could always do that by URL. Everyone going to this website gets a high priority. So we could say every website that's not Netflix gets the high priority. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. Obviously, that's a little bigger rule than saying is Netflix. So I prefer to make them a little more specific just to reduce overhead. But there's a ton of things in here, basically to give you any option you need. I don't want Untangle users to feel limited to think that they can only throttle a device, that they can only throttle an website or something like that. If I wanted to, I could come say every single packet that comes from a client IP in Germany gets throttled. So there's a lot of different ways. The user in group, user in domain is a really cool thing too. And that's what I was talking about earlier. If I could, I would say, anyone who's in the Active Directory group teachers. They get a higher priority than everyone else. So that would instill a login rule, basically. So they would need to log in. It would hit, your Active Directory, whatever it is. And then when they're authenticated, no matter the session, no matter the traffic, no matter the device that they authenticated on, they get a high priority. So long story short, yeah, there's a ton of ways to shape traffic at layer 7 with bandwidth control. I really recommend everyone jumping on our demo server or your own server and playing around with some of these conditions because they do some really interesting things. As I said, we can do even MAC vendors, MAC addresses. So scrolling through here, we can see we have about 30, 40 different conditions. They all pull all the same data from all those apps we mentioned. So once we start really shaping traffic, you can come in and you can say, well, I just want to see the prioritized sessions. I just want to see bypass sessions. What are the top countries by total bytes? Well, mine's US, of course it is. So I can eliminate that, and then we see some more actions. So there's Canada, Great Britain, Netherlands. There's, like I said, there's about 20, 30 reports built in, and if you want to, you can always customize these. Any of these can be customized and saved as a new report. If you're not seeing a report that you want about bandwidth consumption, if you're not getting the information that you're looking for, just don't get frustrated. We have a lot of resources for you. We have our wiki, our forums, our support team here. But to me, I think bandwidth control is one of the most valuable apps we make. I think it has some of the most valuable reporting that we have by default, out of the box, basically. So like I said, everything can be customized. But just looking at things here, you can see I'm limiting this device quite a bit, but I still see all of its traffic. So if I want, there's more details available. And you can see they're coming through, the thing's coming through Rubicon right now. That's the actual mobile app. Is it blocked? No. The category is web services, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of really interesting information available. Let's see, I think that's almost all I wanted to cover right there on the demos. Shannon, do we have any questions sitting out there yet?
Yeah, there were some questions about QoS.
Okay.
What's the difference between reservations and limits?
Yeah, let's jump back over there and I'll get it on the screen here. So just the quick, easy way to remember, reservation is the minimum that they get. So right here, if I'm limiting someone severely, I call it throttling them to death. You know, this is as much as I can squeeze their bandwidth pipe down. They're going to still get a minimum of 2% for the reservation. So they'll never go below 2% when it's available. But the limit is their maximum. They'll never get above 5% with this rule. So even if no one else was on the network and just this person was, they would still not really get more than 5% because that's what I'm limiting them to. So just reservation is minimum, limit is maximum.
All right, thank you. There was some questions about penalty boxes.
Yeah, we still kind of use that term, but it's not not entirely a real thing anymore. We still basically use the term to describe, someone who's being, punished for their bandwidth consumption. So the penalty box rules exist still. If you want to get in touch with our support team, it's actually, there's some documentation on it still, but we don't really use a real penalty box anymore. It's still just a thing we say kind of because it simplifies things. So those rules that you see, apply penalty box host, that kind of stuff, we're penalty boxing people basically. But yeah, if you want kind of the official documentation on it, our support team can shoot you over because that was a little bit of a change here 2 or 3 versions ago in Untangle. So the verbiage is kind of the same, but it's a little bit different functionality. Still basically just sealing people off with no bandwidth or 2%.
Okay. There was a question about the application control. Do I need to have that app installed in order to get to see the info?
Yeah, you do. So that's one of the real benefits, I think, of getting the Untangle Complete package. One of the main benefits, obviously, is you have live support. You can call our team out here in Colorado for help. But that gives you access to, all these apps that bandwidth control ties into. So if you only bought the bandwidth control app, you'd have traffic shaping, but you wouldn't be able to leverage URLs. You wouldn't be able to leverage mobile applications. So unless app control, web filter, and directory connector are also installed here in the same policy, you won't be able to actually leverage those. So even if I came over here to my employee policy and I didn't have application control installed just for that policy, I wouldn't be able to see those there. So I would have to come in and customize that for this group. That's one of the better things about Untangle's complete package is how modular it can be. You can be really broad and let Untangle just be kind of a safety net, or we can get really granular and be as specific and man in the middle as we need to and really see all that encrypted traffic. So it just kind of depends on the group, on the organization. But yeah, the app has to be installed into the actual policy, not just on the box. We have to install it into the policy.
Okay, just a few more coming in.
Yeah, sure.
There's a question about the reporting. Do I need to install and enable the application in order to see the reports, or are the reports just there?
Yeah, so you'll need to install the app. That will generate the reports. What you don't have to do is enable it. So that's just this little button right here. So I'm just turning my bandwidth control off. So if that's how it looks when you install it, if you don't enable the actual app, you'll still get some information. It's still scanning traffic. You'll get some reporting info on usage. But you can't really do anything until you come in and turn it on, obviously. And then that's when you run through the whole setup wizard and start creating rules and everything. It's handy when you don't enable it like that because it can just kind of sniff traffic and show you what's going on. But yeah, if you're gonna have bandwidth control and you want to do any of this, you might as well just go enable it, run the setup wizard. But yeah, you can turn it on and just leave it off for a while to let us see what you need to kind of set up rules for.
Okay. Someone's asking about the last example you did for the teacher group. The last example with teacher was a security group with Active Directory to prioritize traffic for all individuals within that security group, or was that a teacher tag?
No, that was a group. Yeah. And if you do that, let me jump back over there. This is one of my devices that doesn't have an Active Directory connected, actually. So I just typed in teachers. That's why it looked that way. But normally, you'll just say user in group, or you can do domain. You can do your entire domain now. User in group is, you see how I click that, it drops down. That's where you see your actual user groups. I just don't have this leveraged on this box. I just wanted to be able to do bandwidth control on this one. So that's where you can do that. So I just typed in teachers, but that's a group. That wasn't a tag. Yeah, so we can do that by group. We could also do it, we could also do it just by single or comma separated usernames. So if I wanted to just, throttle myself, I could sign in and just say, boom, if it was me and Shannon, we're just both throttled now. So there's a couple different ways to do that. I'm just typing it in because I don't have an actual AD leveraged right here for that drop down.
Great, thanks. There's some support
questions. Next time I'll leverage them all, next time.
Yeah, there's some support questions. So if you do have a specific support question about if something's not working for your box, please email us at support@untangle.com. That's the best way for us to help you. We can't really help you on a webinar.
Right. and I think this is mostly existing Untangle customers. These are pretty deep dives, these tech talks. But if you are kind of coming in new and you're just kind of kicking the tires, we also have pre-sales at untangle.com. That's my team. You can email for just quick, questions. Does it do this? Does it do this? Can it do this? We're here to help too. I did want to show a couple of quick things here, a couple of links. We mentioned support@untangle.com. Troubleshooting your config in bandwidth control is actually kind of simple. It's either doing, minimal stuff or you've set it up to do a lot of stuff. So the session viewer is a really easy thing to do. Like I was showing you, just click sessions. In the server, you'll see bandwidth control priorities. You'll see all those fields that you've entered, all the columns that will be available. And then the events reports, that's what I'm talking about, is the event viewer. And then some of those reports, like I said, there's about 20 to 30 of them by default. And if you need any help customizing reports, we have tons of documentation. Like I said, with the complete package, you'll also have live support. You can just holler at our support team out here in Colorado and have them, kind of walk you through some of that stuff. I can also, help out with that stuff if you hit us up at pre-sales. But we also have we just unveiled our new support knowledge base. And we've got the forums and then the Untangle YouTube URL right there. It's just user/Untangle Corp. It's real easy to find. Let's see, I think that's about all I had. Shannon?
Great. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, as Chad mentioned, we have a bunch of resources if you don't want to try and figure it out by yourself. We have the forums and support, as well as the wiki, which is our technical documentation. But if you are completely lost and don't know what to do or where to start, or need some help configuring your Untangle box, we do offer professional services. So, whether that be you already have Untangle or you're looking at Untangle as a solution, we offer professional services to help you get started or to kind of specialize your configuration needs. Maybe your environment has changed and you need to kind of tweak some things. We're here to help.
That's actually I don't mean to interrupt you. That's actually a really good point, though, a use case for our system optimization service. Sometimes things change. Maybe you put a new device on the network or you add 20 more PCs or something like that. If it's something, like she was saying, if it's something you can't figure out in a 20, 30-minute support call, we do offer something like that. And a system optimization it's not a one-time thing. If you want to pay for one of those every month, that's okay. But that gives you 2 hours of one of our techs on the phone with you to just do what you couldn't accomplish in a simple support call. So yeah, like Shannon was saying, if things change, we can help out a lot with kind of adapting to those changes for you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say on this slide. We're almost done, guys. But for those of you that have hung on, just want to offer some of our promotions that are going on right now. We have our trade-in, trade-up program where if you have an existing Untangle license or a competitor's license and you are looking to change to Untangle or upgrade your Untangle instance, we do offer special pricing for that. Some pretty good discounts on the software upgrades and appliances. So please email us or call your support or sales rep to find out what those discounts are. And our surprise August promo is still going on for the month of August. We don't do many of these promos hardly ever.
Surprise.
So yeah, surprise. So we're offering 15% off all software packages for the month of August. So take advantage of this if you're, looking to resize your environment, whether you grew or decreased, your devices, or you're looking at Untangle. Now's the time to buy to get that special discount. So contact us today to get started. And I think that's about it. I don't think any other questions came in. I think we answered all of them, so that's great. But if you do have a question later on, please submit them to us, whether sales@untangle.com or support@untangle.com. A follow-up email will be going out tomorrow to everyone that registered with the link to this. You can always email back to us through that if you have any questions that you may have later on. Yeah, thanks, Chad, for the great demo, and thanks everyone for sticking around and listening to us today. We hope to see you next time.
Thanks.